Heritage Consulting Group in 2021, this year, as the Midwestern Regional Director. She is responsible for business development and the management of heritage projects in the Midwest region. Prior to joining Heritage, Jen worked for the Wisconsin State Preservation Office as Deputy SHPO and Tax Credit Reviewer. Jen received her Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from the University of Minnesota and the Master of Architecture from Certificate in Preservation Studies from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. So, Jen, take it away.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure Matt put Donna and I together because we're the same height. So, we're going to go with that. Thank you. I'd like to thank Matt Jaros for asking, and for the Wisconsin Trust for Historic Preservation for asking me to speak this morning. I really enjoy seeing so many familiar faces, and I've enjoyed meeting new people here today too. While I have worked in many different arenas in historic preservation, I am now, as Anya mentioned, heading up the Midwest office for Heritage Consulting Group. And it's really exciting. Heritage has been around since 1982, but people on the East Coast and West Coast know us. So now I'm bringing Heritage to the Midwest here. So anyway, with that, we'll get started with building research. And I did practice. We're going to go on the down one. So building research. When I asked a friend of mine and a former colleague, Peggy Berrigan, who's our coordinator for Wisconsin, Peggy, what do you have to say about research? And this is what she said. Research, you never know what you're going to find. And I loved it. It's so true. And I had to throw this photo in because research, you might find a ginormous yo-yo. Who knows? But I like this image because I used to live in Luck, Wisconsin, and not many people know about Luck, Wisconsin. But anyway, so research is so much fun. It doesn't matter what type of building you're researching. It's fantastic. There's so many different arenas to go into, so many different stories. When I was in architecture school at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and Matt Jaros was one of my favorite professors, and he's listening very closely right now. I did a lot of research for Matt, and I would go down to the city of Milwaukee, the city hall, and dig through their building permits, and it was amazing what you could find and information you didn't even know that you needed, right? All right, so then, okay, why is research so important? These are my two big ones. A building, if you want to get it listed on the National Register and the State Register, you have to do building research. Now, anybody who's seen a nomination from 1979, let's say, those were about 2 pages long, and I don't think there was a whole lot of research involved. I think it was somebody who was looking at the building and kind of wrote down what they saw, right? Today, and my friend Peggy can fill you in on this, they're mini thesis papers. These nominations are 40 pages, and they require you to know anything and everything about the building, who built it, why they built it, who's been in that building, everything. It is amazing. And that's just standard now. And because of that, some of our first buildings in the state of Wisconsin, Villa Louis, which was one of our first nominations, the National Park Service has hired a consultant to rewrite the nomination. Donna, was it 2 pages? The Villa Louis?
A little bit longer,
okay,
but a lot of errors.
Oh, yeah. So to be fair, so we're now rewriting building nominations because we just didn't have the information. So first and foremost, that's why we do building research nominations. And so we were talking about historic tax credits yesterday, and that's something else that I love is historic tax credit projects. But if you want to apply for the historic tax credits and you're not already listed, this is what you need to do to get to that point. Beyond the nomination, which I promised Peggy I would emphasize many times, the nomination. I got you back, Peggy. It is about informing the rehabilitation. And so I could talk to you all morning about building projects that I've worked on before my life in the state or at Heritage. I'm a preservation architect. And so I've worked on so many projects where that information, that research, will help inform what you're going to do with that building. And I'll give some examples of that later here. This is a theater not in Wisconsin, it's actually in Tennessee. But this is a project that we're working on in with Heritage, applying for tax credits. That's it? I'm sure it was. I'll do a little research. I'll figure out if we do this. So where do we do research? You know, a lot of this can be, you know, kind of like, well, of course you go to the library. But if you do enough research, you figure out the best places. And of course I happen to have a photo here of my former home away from home, the Wisconsin Historical Society. And it's a fantastic resource. But oftentimes, when I be working with owners of projects, I'd say go to your county historical society also. Don't miss that, because they're more likely to have those photos of the parade, and they weren't trying to take a picture, but guess what? Your building is right there, and the parade going by. And so, historical societies, the state, I would also say, of course, it's 2021. Online research is key, but I really want to warn you to use verified resources, and because there is some misinformation there on the internet. The other thing, and just this past week, my colleague Laura Grochan here was doing some research, and she was talking about the phone books. And I was like, first of all, a phone book? We haven't said those words in a long time, right? But phone books are also a fantastic resource with your research. So don't forget about things like that. City halls, building permits, all of that fun stuff. All right, this is the inside of the Tivoli Theater in Tennessee, and it was a wrap and wrap theater also. And when I first was starting on this project, I was like, this looks a lot like the Orpheum on State Street in Madison. Oh, it's the same architect. Okay, I get it. Okay, so it's not only important, we know why we do the research, what it's for, but you want to have a plan. There have been times that maybe I jumped in before I was really thinking about what I was trying to get out of this research. What are the questions I'm trying to answer? And you want a plan. Otherwise, you're going to spend days and weeks researching, and when you're done, you're going to say, oh, well, that was really interesting. I talked to the family that lived next door for 50 years, but it's not really going to help me fill out my nomination, for example. I'm not getting paid for how many times I say National Register nomination. I just want you to know that. All right, so what are we looking for? Everything, anything and everything. I was mentioning Laura. She has been doing research on the Paoli Creamery, and she's been interviewing families and people that used to work at Paoli Creamery. It's fantastic. It's no different than getting jumping in the deep end, but Laura's been interviewing people. Newspaper articles. I love the original newspaper articles announcing a grand opening, for example. They'll describe the finishes. They'll describe the color of the carpet or the drapes or whatever was painted on. It's amazing what they did. We don't really do that anymore. But that's a great resource of information. Building permits, that was my favorite thing in grad school. I loved the City of Milwaukee building permits. Original drawings. That's not always going to be possible. But if you can find original drawings, also just a gold mine. One of my favorite projects when I was at Strang Architects in Madison, we were on site and we were just asking, just by the off chance, do you have historic drawings? And they said, you know what? We were in the basement and there was this Rubbermaid garbage can. And there were these rolls and they were all just thrown in there and then it was covered with boxes and stuff. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, those are the original drawings. There was water in the bottom. I was like, oh my gosh. So just remember, you want to start at home. Start in the basement, start in the attic. It's amazing what you can find in the building itself. Let's see. Sanborn maps. We love Sanborn maps. That tells you a lot of information as well. Of course, Sanborn maps were made in Paoli, so that didn't help us. But always check out and see if your building is on a Sanborn map. We were talking about interviews. My favorite story about this is I was in Neillsville, Wisconsin, and it was when I first started at SHPO. It was one of my first site visits, and we were talking about this hotel in Neillsville, and they wanted to restore the bar, but they couldn't find historic photos. And I'm talking with the owner, and we were on the sidewalk, and a man walks by. And he said, "Are you talking about the bar in this hotel?" And I said, "Yeah." "Oh, I have pictures of that. We'd have family reunions there, whatever." And I thought, what? Where did this guy come from? So also, I mentioned local historical societies. Talk to people in the community. It's amazing if you ask for photos of a building, you're going to find some, which is a lot of fun. Let's see. All right, I'm going to keep moving. Historic photos, because we have Donna coming after me. Donna's is awesome here. Okay, historic photos. This is my favorite, and it's amazing what a historic photo. We know what the building looks like today. We've seen the accretion, we can see the additions and whatnot, but when were they done? Why were these additions done? Why were these changes made? It could be political, social, economic. So these historic photos are fantastic, and I always say it's a gold mine. If you're doing a building restoration, rehab, to find these photos. This example is in Ohio, and you can see on the lower left the photo. It was an entire block for this building. The top middle was maybe 1940s. I can't remember. We always date photos by the cars that are in the photos. And then the lower right is what it looks like today. And you can see the north end, actually, that it had a slipcover put on in 1967, 62. And so us preservationists, whoa, compared to what it looked like, wow. But come to find out, with Laura's research, is that that was actually an award-winning design in 1963. So architects all got together and said, that's it, right there. And so finding these historic photos and doing the research, it's amazing what we learned. And in 1963, that was it, right? I think for me, building research is wonderful. It's right up there with going and measuring a building. I was talking to Matt. This presentation before is fantastic. But when I was in grad school, we were the ones out there with tape measures. I'm like, that's just dating me a little bit there. But research is fun. It's exciting, and you never know what you're going to find. This is the Pope Brace building in Illinois, in Kankakee, Illinois. And Heritage, just as a brief overview of what we do. This building, we wrote the nomination to get it listed on the state and national register. We did the research to find the historic photographs, which is informing the rehabilitation of this building. And we have a lot of fun doing it as well. So this is kind of like the part one for building research. And I'm going to turn it over to Donna, and she is going to take it away with historic structures reports. I think we're going to hold questions until after.
I just want to know the architect of that building.
This one?
Yeah.
I don't know. But you know the Pope brace? They were, the polio braces were made in this building. I know. Pope brace. Okay. Thank you. We'll do questions after.
Thank you, Jen. Just a wide realm of knowledge. People are taking notes. I see that. So I'm going to briefly introduce Donna before she takes it away. Donna Weiss is the founding member and architectural conservator. She brings to preserve 25 years of preservation experience in a wide variety of project types. Donna's specialty is building pathology, the assessment of historical building conditions, and specifications of acceptable repair treatments. Identification of character-defining features is an important part of this work to inventory and communicate these critical details to the greater project team. Donna brings to each project her enthusiasm for historical preservation and a deep knowledge base of technical preservation skills, restoration cost estimation, and project management. Many preserved projects includes the utilization of state federal historical tax credit, grants, government oversight, and coordination with numerous local, state, and national agencies, such as National Park Service. So welcome, Donna.
Good morning. Just to add really quickly before I get started to what Jen said is when you have a project and you're lacking documentation, it never ever hurts to write a quick press release or reach out to your favorite local reporter and tell them you're looking for things. As an example, we had a project in our historic chapel at the Soldiers' Home Chapel grounds in Milwaukee, and the altar had significantly changed, but we didn't know when. Based on the materials that were used. So we put a shout out with the architectural reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and we got a plethora mailed to us of wedding photos. The wedding dresses, oh my God, from the 60s, the 70s, it was amazing, but we were able to use the dates of all of their weddings to really create a timeline for when the altar had changed, and also some of the murals and art glass had changed, and we didn't know that at the time. So it was really fun to actually have people share that with us, and I'd be like, well, how do I get your wedding photos back to you? They're like, oh, we made new copies. I'm like, you made us copies? Wow, this is awesome. Anyway, so as part of what Jen was talking about with research, the condition assessments I'm going to talk about today is another avenue of research that's incredibly important. So at the inception of the project, you want to know, first of all, do I have a property that we can list on the state and national registers so that we can actually take advantage of some grants and historic tax credits, because they're incredible opportunities for funding for a project. But the other thing that you also need to understand are the things I'm going to run through this morning about why condition assessments are so important for determining the costs of the project right off the bat, but also how that also informs and feeds on the research that you're getting as you move forward with the project. So I'm going to, in limited time this morning, I'm going to try and cover as much as I can. We're going down, right, Jen? Oh, hello. Where do we point and why is this not working? You're out of practice, right? All right, cool. Yes, awesome. All right, so project ramp up. So before I talk a little bit more about what condition assessments are and what information you need to gather, I wanted to run through a few things that are really important to kind of holistically take a look at your project. So that you don't feel like you're driving off a ramp. For lack of a better word. So as you're starting a project, there are really, historic theaters are a unique building type. They present unique opportunities and unique challenges, such as how can you use it, what could you use it for, what's the condition of the building, budget, funding sources, is there parking, community support, things of that nature. So really to delve into this, you need to develop early on, and theaters are often owned by it could be a private ownership, it could be a public-private partnership, it may be private owner that is leasing to a nonprofit. So there's all these different mixes that we see. Because theaters are such a specific building type, they don't always have like, oh, we're going to use it for a retail store and put apartments above. Theaters don't work that way. So there's often like this amalgamation of owners and users that come into play to make these projects a reality. So there's a lot of different pieces to that puzzle that all have to come to fruition at the same time. So a project approach is going to vary based on the site, the building size, your potential use, fundraising efforts, your building condition, the time frame of the project. And so it's really important to have a theoretical plan when you start and be open-minded so that can evolve over time as you proceed. And so critical elements that you really kind of need to determine, and again, be open because these things tend to change over time. And as you get other funding partners, other uses, potential tenants, things like that. So the use and potential use income generation. So can the building support the operation and maintenance costs by what the use is going to be? That's a big one because obviously theaters have a lot of cubic feet of space to heat and cool. There's electrical costs, things like that. So is the use, if it's a nonprofit, are we going to generate enough income that you can actually pay the real estate taxes, pay to keep the lights on, all of those things? So that's one thing. Building condition. Is the building reasonably repairable? And unfortunately, sometimes we have to say it's not. And luckily, that's a very rare situation. But if the building's been sitting vacant for decades, it's possible, and I know there's some stories you heard yesterday where the building actually gets torn down before the effort can come to fruition to actually save the building. Sometimes it's actually torn down way before a condition assessment is done to establish whether or not it's actually salvageable, and the municipality just pulls the trigger on a demo permit really way proactively before they really should. And so design, is the building adaptable to the proposed use? Often, yes, absolutely. And then factors relating to budget are also important, such as, is the budget realistic based upon the building condition and user needs? Can funds be raised for meeting those budgetary needs? And oh great, it's dripping water on my notes. That's awesome. And what are the potential funding sources? And again, some of these things evolve over time as different players come in and out of the mix. You may align with someone and then it doesn't work out, and then you find someone else. Timeline what is the funding timeline and construction budget, construction time frame, and is it realistic? And then barriers to use, which could be any of the things I've mentioned and things you don't know about yet. So this part is really important. You need to assemble a dream team because these people will be with you for years. You're going to work with them on a day-to-day basis, and it's important that's a level of trust and expertise that's been established. So having the right players on that team is really critical to the project's success. Funds may be lacking initially to hire every team member, but it's at project inception, but it's really important to understand what skill sets you need and what roles they play. So initial core team members are historic preservation specialists, someone like myself. So that title includes a wide variety of skill sets. It could mean a building material specialist, building pathologist, historic tax credit consultants, National Register preparers, etc. And so that's sort of a fluctuating list based on your exact project and frankly how intact your building is or is not. Some projects already have been listed on the National Register. Really common for theaters that they're already designated, so that's something that you don't have to do, which is great. Historic tax credit applications are not a do-it-yourself enterprise. I do not at all recommend that you do them yourselves. Please hire a preparer to do them for you, because we know the tricks. We know what the National Trust is looking. The National Park Service and our SHPO's office are looking for, and we can work directly with your architects to kind of augment that for you so that it's not you're trying to figure this out on your own. An architect, you want an architect that is well versed in historic building rehabilitation and theaters, who will lead the project through the design, restoration, rehabilitation, and they will also lead like the MEP design, those sub-consultants, engineering, things like that along the way through the project. A construction manager is actually important to have on early in the project, and that entity should also be well-versed in historic building rehabilitation and theaters, and they oversee all of the subcontractors on the project as well. Sometimes it's also just a general contractor, so it depends on how you're forming your project team and locally what's available to your project. A fundraising manager will be a person who's well-versed in nonprofit and for-profit fundraising and also capital campaigns. An owner's rep could be a board member from the theater group or the organization. It could be one of the building owners. It could be an owner's rep that has a construction and historic restoration background that's hired to attend all of the various meetings and really act on the owner's behalf. To kind of inform you. And you may own a building and not have any construction or historic building background, and so it's important to have someone representing your best interests who understands all of the nomenclature involved. So, just in case you missed it, did I happen to mention that you should hire a team well-versed in historic rehabilitation and historic theaters? Most of you are like, yeah, of course, but you will be amazed how many projects we worked on where the architect has never worked on a historic building, never worked on a theater, and never worked on a historic tax credit project. You don't want to pay someone to learn these skills. You want to hire people that have these skills. And I don't mean like one theater. You want to talk to somebody who's worked on 3, 4, 5 theaters, someone who's worked on 5, 10 historic tax credit projects. And there are a wide variety of really wonderful professionals throughout Wisconsin, Illinois, like all the surrounding areas who have that skill set. All right, so now, finally, we're going to talk about condition assessments. Condition assessments are really important right off the bat, as soon as you have any funding available to do a condition assessment. And let's talk about why. So it's a critical step that is actually often left until much later in the project. Sometimes it's never fully executed, which, as you can probably understand, is a real problem if the bid documents, like if the construction budget's already been established and the bid documents are done, and then all of a sudden you find that there's this undiscovered condition because no one ever did a complete condition assessment of the building, and now you're like, well, where are we going to find this money? A great example is this picture of me on this really tall scaffold at your far right. This project, the architect is an architect I know well out of Chicago. We worked together. They hired a consultant to do a condition assessment of a 187-foot water tower in downtown Milwaukee, the North Front Water Tower. So, project gets, bid drawings are issued, permits get going. It's a City of Milwaukee project, so they allocated funds from the city budget. Project is awarded to the general contractor. The general contractor hired my team to be the historic preservation sort of project manager during construction. And we go up on the swing stage and I'm like, we have a lot of loose stone here and a lot of open mortar joints, and none of this is in the bid documents. And so we talked to the architect, we talked to the city, and they're like, we need to reassess this. So we did a condition assessment of the masonry and found $150,000 of masonry repairs after the budget was already allocated. No one should ever have this happen on their project. Literally, there were stones that you could pull right out of the wall, and I could pull them right out of the wall, which says a lot because I'm not very strong. And you don't want to ever have this happen. I mean, because then we have to scramble and you have to find that money because some of these stones were loose enough that at any point some of them could have fallen. And then there's liability, and obviously no one wants to have to deal with that. But again, the city had to find $150,000, which came from another city project that funds had already been allocated to. So that project didn't get to happen. So that's one of the reasons why this is really important, and it's important for it to happen sooner rather than later. So, what is a condition assessment for those of you who don't already know? It evaluates the current state of all existing building materials and systems. It literally touches every surface, every system. Sometimes the building systems we don't get that far into because they've been abandoned for so long that it's going to be a complete gut, and you know that. So you know that all of your HVAC equipment, all of your electrical is all like old clock wiring, things like that. You know that that's all going to go away. But it's important to understand where they are Luckily, theaters usually have a lot of plenum space that you can put new HVAC in and things like that, so that's not usually a problem, but understanding where they are and where those systems are located helps a great deal in informing where the new systems can go. So as soon as possible, executing a condition assessment, you can fully understand the condition of the existing building, and frankly, you won't get a second crack at this, especially on a theater project, especially if you're a nonprofit as well, because if those items are left out of the budget, as I've already spoken to, it will have an impact. If these things are found after construction or during construction, you already have a construction budget. You've probably also got a construction bridge loan that's financing the work. So you already have a budget cap once that project starts. Where do you get additional money for fines that happen? So you really need to understand anything that's happened, anything that could potentially add to the budget, because if it gets found after the building's completed, now all of a sudden your daily operating budget is impacted by these things you need to pay to fix. And these damaged items may impact things that have already been restored due to a roof leak or something like that. So when funds are lacking to hire, to do a full condition assessment, we often are like, well, what can we do for a smaller amount of fee? So what we do is we kind of do a walkthrough and we discuss with the ownership team, what are the things we feel like are the lowest hanging fruit? Meaning, like, what are the things that have the biggest impact on conditions and are likely to exacerbate deterioration in that gap time frame of your fundraising, the architect's doing drawings, or you're trying to get your plan together of who's going to use the building. Honestly, sometimes that takes years. Sometimes it's like really condensed. So what we do is we will often do a cut to the chase condition assessment, where we will look for items that, if unattended, can compromise structural integrity, will exacerbate building deterioration, such as decorative plaster, or present hazards to the public, such as like stones that might fall out of the tower of the building. One of the things that I see that have the greatest impact on conditions in buildings that are sort of mothballed or sort of left sitting is that darn roof. Like, having a hat on your building, like, it's a great metaphor, but if that hat is intact, you can mothball a building for literally decades if you keep the roof in good condition. And there might be some freeze thaw, cycling issues if the building's unheated, but really the buildings that have a good roof have less deterioration. So this particular example, I feel bad, I don't really want to call out what building this is, but some of you will know. Allison's nodding her head. This particular building, this is actually the best condition of the roof. So it actually gets worse, but unfortunately I couldn't find exactly that picture. So this roofing membrane is obviously not adhered fully to the concrete decking. There are areas where along the parapet, the roof is not at all adhered to the parapet, and it's right at where all of the water drains. It's like the low point of the roof. Well, that low point of the roof just happens to be the parapet that is in the upper right image. That's what's happening to that parapet, simply because there's not a good hat on the building. Well, obviously, that brick, we put crack gauges on this, and every time we went, that crack was a little wider. Every winter it sat. It's like, and it literally, when did we start that project, Allison? 2016? This parapet just got rebuilt over the past 2 weeks, and we started this in 2016. So we put aircraft cable and anchors to kind of help keep it from falling over onto the lower parts of the building and onto the street and on a parking lot nearby. But literally freeze-thaw cycling for years sat in here and acted its way through the building. And the picture below is what it did to the interior decorative plaster. It's gone. The bricks that you see, there was a fire in the building, and that we can obviously augment and encapsulate, recoat. But the decorative plaster is really expensive to recreate. Plaster work's not bad, but the plaster cost estimate for this job it's high. It's like, I think it's $250,000 of plaster damage, if I remember my budget numbers correctly. So again, like keeping a roof on the building, if you can fundraise any immediate funds to do any kind of roof patching, you can prevent things like this from happening. And again, on this project, because the roof sat open for so long, the parapet repairs were really key. So what's happening right now is the parapets were just rebuilt. beautifully, and the roof is being, a new roof is being put on. So now we have our hat. And soon we will have storefronts, right, Allison? Yes. This is another example of a really wonderful theater that, for any of you who are historic theater advocates, I believe we have a theater owner here. This theater needs some love. It's amazing. It's the Uptown Majestic Theater in Racine, Wisconsin. The image on your left is a picture of the building as it was historically. Unfortunately, there's not really good historic photographs of this building. But this building, like just as an example, if you look at the image in your upper right, you see these murals, and those are all painted on canvas. Well, if you look at the image on the left, some of the canvas murals are actually coming away because the building is so damp. And I don't know whether the mural, like you think the mural is going to come off, it's going to delaminate, and it's going to hit the floor. So that canvas mural should be on the floor. I didn't see it, so I don't know where it is. So sometimes people also walk off with things. So deteriorated roof equals loss of materials, which equals a lot of dollar signs. And so this is sort of, another image of the same building where look at all the natural daylight coming through the roof deck. That's why there's so much plaster loss. And if you look at that upper left image, there is an amazing amount of plaster loss in this building. Luckily, there's enough left that we could recreate what was lost, but imagine the budget numbers on that. We haven't run cost estimates yet, and it's going to be a really high price tag. And then you start thinking about, okay, can we be creative about this where if we don't have the budget, where we could open it and do a limited scope of plaster restoration, where you have examples that are really great, fully restored areas, and then you have these areas that are sort of like in this, sort of apocalyptic condition, but like cleaned up so that you can actually use the space. And sometimes that's what you need to do. But so basically, once these immediate issues are understood, you can do a smaller immediate conditions. Once immediate conditions that are really critical items are understood, you can do a smaller fundraising effort. And sometimes that's just an interested donor with a big checkbook. Sometimes it's grants that we can help you apply for and point you in the right direction for. There are also some really wonderful funding sources that will not only fund some of the condition assessment report types I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes, but also will fund some of the brick and mortar construction. And so you're not in this alone. We're all here to help. So some of these initial funds could go towards a temporary roof, a temporary drainage system if that's the issue, structural shoring if that's the issue. Because again, like one of the things we'd like to do on this theater is an immediate structural evaluation, because with this amount of water, the structural system is a metal pan deck and it's corroded. So do we have structural compromise? I don't know yet. So that's pretty important. But also like any board up of any unstable doors and windows, and making sure also that the building is secure, and the installation of mobile dehumidifiers and unit heaters. You're like, why do you need to dehumidify now? It is amazing how much historic plaster and historic masonry walls will hold moisture. So not only will you get things such as additional plaster delamination and mortar deterioration from having high moisture levels, you will also not be able to repair it because the walls are too damp to repair. So we actually go in and monitor with moisture meters to get readings on those moisture levels to see when it is actually at a point where repairs can be made. So oftentimes I was just at a really beautiful mansion yesterday where the moisture meter readings in the wall were at 90% it's literally off the charts on my moisture meter. It needs to be at like below 16%. Before you can do repairs. It takes a long time to do that. And so there's some steps that we can take, such as like opening up mortar joints and letting them sit, they sit over a couple of seasons so that they can kind of, all that moisture vapor percolates out of the building, installing dehumidifiers in the building. Sometimes they have to be run off of generators if you don't have any power in the building, but that's something that we have to do. Opening windows or putting vents in windows so you get natural convection. There's all kinds of things that we can do to kind of get the building drying out. So the idea is really to get the building sitting in homeostasis, like in a static state, until the funding is available or the construction documents are done and permits are ready and the funding's all figured out and the bank loans are all set so you can actually start construction. so that you're not incurring additional costs to actually execute, to do more costs because conditions have actually worsened. So the goal of a condition assessment is really to understand the full scope of work and costs associated with the core building components of the existing building. So I'm not talking here about what the architects need to add. I'm talking about what the current building is doing. And that is your baseline of your construction budget. A lot of times we find projects, and this happens so often, I kid you not. I have several projects a year where there's like no budget to rebuild parapets. None. Oh, we didn't look at those, there's no budget for it. I'm like, those parapets are falling over. They need to be rebuilt down to the roof line. We don't have budget for that. And they're just not doing it. They're just not gonna do it. Like, okay, so at some point, the owner, unbeknownst to them, like, is gonna have this water infiltration that they could have stopped. And someone along the way has opted that that's not an option, which seems really irresponsible to your budget and to just not having inconvenience and cost adds while you're operating the building. So items that we would address in a condition assessment are code review. So how does the building currently meet or violate codes such as egress? Do we have historic toilet rooms? What is it? Can they be adapted? What's the toilet room count that we're going to need? And we'll work too with the architects. Oh man! Awesome! I got a project. Oh, this is going to be awesome. All right, so we're just going to keep going. This is like my AD nightmare. Anyway, so structure is the structure. If you can't hear me in the back, raise your hand, and I will do my best. My husband will probably tell you I can be quite loud when I want to be. So is the structure stable? Does the structure need augmentation? What is that? And then again, how do we augment the structure without damaging any of the character-defining features of the historic building? Roofing and drainage, again, we've seen examples of where the roofing and drainage systems are shot. What is that going to cost to repair, and how soon does that need to be addressed? Other condition items that we evaluate is all of the masonry, from the foundation, the cornices, the parapets, the field walls, any decorative ornament, etc. Windows, doors, fire escapes, and interior stairs, exterior stairs, interior, and luckily theaters have really good interior stairs and also ample chase space for mechanicals, which is great. Heating, ventilation, and cooling, what's it currently doing? Again, usually it's all just completely a gut. And then obviously we have mechanical, electrical, and of course my favorite, fire protection. A lot of historic theaters don't have it. How do you get it into a historic theater and make it look okay? It's never gonna look great. Is it gonna look okay? So one thing too that we also include in all of our condition assessments, regardless of the level, is a prioritized list of repairs. Again, this is the baseline of your project costs. You shouldn't really be looking at any new augmentation, like any of the new things that architecturally you need, like code compliant, code compliant exit doors, toilet rooms that are ADA compliant, any of those things, until you know what that historic building is going to cost you to rehabilitate or restore first, and can make educated decisions about what are the best means and methods for how that's going to happen. So any condition assessment should include this prioritized list of repairs, and we break it down into categories. So code compliance, security, and hazardous conditions is always our first priority. Like, is there anything that is a threat to the building that may cause a fire? Anything that's a hazardous condition? And then, is the building secure? Oftentimes our theaters sit for 3, 4, 5, we've got one at 6 years right now that we're working on. Is anybody getting into the building? One building, incidentally, this is funny because Allison, this was the Tower Theater project, we found a kitten. And luckily we had, Matt Luzak was there, many of you know him, he's a plaster restorer, and he took the kitten home. Mama Kitten had moved her kittens into a trash bin and moved them out and left them behind. And I was like, hey, can Eddie shout out, anybody need a kitten? And luckily Matt took her home, so that was really great. So it also, we include in that exterior envelope elements, interior elements, obviously like everything, flooring, plaster work, walls, like everything, tile work, etc. Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, which also include fire protection, and then interior enhancements. And this is kind of the fun category. This is the category that you want to have a lot of money for, but you don't always have a lot of money for. And depending upon what someone's done to the theater before you got there, this might be a small budget, it might be a really big budget. But those are items that restore and augment the theater's historic appearance. So they're the things that you really want. Like you want to recreate the historic parts of it's missing. Decorative plaster restoration, recreation, decorative painting and murals. Like Tony, you want to work on that, right? You'll hear Tony talk about that soon.
Occasionally.
Yeah, occasionally. Tile restoration. We've got a really great theater we're working on where the foyer, the main entry vestibule was amazing wall and floor tile. We found the floor tile intact, but all the wall tiles gone. It is amazing, and luckily we can recreate that out of a new, modern tile, because we can see the design. And so then don't forget these categories. The next categories are really often overlooked and really important. Material testing, because we want material compatibility. New materials and restoration materials that are compatible with the historic materials. You need a budget line for contingencies, which are fines during the work and other items. General conditions. So usually there's a general contractor cost to mobilize the project and provide things like temporary power, things of that nature, sometimes temporary heat. A big one is a contingency for achieving access to qualified contractors. This is easy if you're in Madison or Milwaukee, but if you're a rural project, you may need to pay someone to come in from further away. That means you're going to pay them for hotel accommodations or, their travel expenses, things like that. You don't want to give a project to someone because they're local but don't have the experience. You need on these projects people who are qualified, and you want to pre-qualify all of your contractors. And entities such as Preserve, so myself and the architects that you work with, will all know how to do that, how to pre-qualify contractors who have worked on historic theaters and historic buildings. And also construction management costs, architectural engineering fees, your historic consultant fees, any historic tax credit syndication fees. If you don't have the tax debt to actually take those tax credits, you're going to need to syndicate those to somebody else, and it's not free. It's not horribly expensive for the tax credit money you're getting, but there's going to be some legal fees and some coordination fees and consultant fees involved in that. And also, this is a big one, inflation over the length of the project. Things cost more every year you don't do them. So if you've got like a 5-year plan, you need to build the inflation costs for that 5-year plan into your budget, because you'll go, well, you told me to raise this much money, but now we need this much money. Well, what was the inflation rate over that period of time? And then they'll find that those numbers were accurate. So now we just build that inflation rate into our project costs, because again, usually these things sit for a while before they actually get going. Hey, guys! This really is an AV night here. Wow! Yeah, baby.
Screen on.
It was designed by
It is on.
Yeah.
It is on.
Working on the microphone.
Well, images would be better than microphone at this point.
Yeah.
Resync her computer to the screen so she can run her for depth. File. Still off.
I don't even know what to do at this point.
Stories.
Yeah, I could tell some really, I could jokes. Oh, do I have any good jokes? No, I don't have any jokes. All right, so there are many different types of condition assessments, and again, when you do them and how much money you have to do them plays a really big role in what type you're actually going to do. There are formal standards in the world of historic restoration and preservation for condition assessments of all types that are outlined by the National Park Service Secretary of the Interior. Oh!
Back.
I think we might be back. This is awesome. I see things that look
And I'm not giving my password to this crowd.
We're almost there. We're almost there. Bear with us, please.
No worries.
I'll get us there. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, so some of the different types of condition assessment reports are a structural conditions assessment. We work with many structural engineers. It is really important to.
Oh, and sound?
Hey.
Oh, I have sound. Now I'm going to be too loud. Sorry. All right, so it is really important to find a structural engineer who is well versed in historic buildings. That's actually harder to do than you might think it is. The problem with finding a structural engineer is that you need someone who isn't going to just take modern calculations and spit out a number, because historic buildings almost never work by modern code calculations. So you need someone who is skilled enough to be like, okay, this building was code compliant when it was built for this load, and I actually have a really great structural engineer, a couple that we work with, that actually goes and they have the historic, the old historic books that kind of for calculating structure, so they can see what they were using historically as their baseline and convert that to what the modern equivalent is, and come out with a structural evaluation that is actually true to what the historic building is actually doing. The difference is that you will see some structural augmentations where they're like, you need to add all of these steel beams and it's going to cost $250,000 or whatever. And we're like, there is no structural deflection in this building at all. There's no sign of structural defect at all. Why would we allocate that much budget money to new structure when there seems to be absolutely no evidence that it's needed? And that's the difference. If you have a structural engineer who can look at it with that historic lens, you will actually save money. And you may have to bring them in, depending on where your project is. It is really, really worth your time and your money and their time to bring someone in from further away who's got that experience. A limited scope conditions assessment, that's again where we target things that are critical path items to make sure that the building is sitting in homeostasis until we can take on a bigger effort. Just a standard condition assessment, which is everything. It's the whole building. It's everything. There are also little fancier type reports. A historic preservation plan is a complete condition assessment, but it also includes a lot of project planning components. Sometimes it also includes as-built drawings, unfinished schedules. It more talks about, sometimes integrates the proposed use. The MacDaddy is a historic structures report. And again, there are really clear guidelines for what these things should and should not include. And there are some consultants who very loosely interpret that, and we're not one of those. Like if it's a historic structure report that you're asking for, we're going to give you a proposal for the whole, what the National Park Service actually considers a full condition assessment report, unless there's things that really just simply do not apply to your project. Like, history of building ownership over time is really interesting if you're working on a light station and the light keepers are living there and the family is maintaining and owning the building. Not quite as interesting when it's a theater. And a lot of our theaters, unfortunately, had some downturn times that they had little seedier operators that did some unsavory things and showed some unsavory movies, and we don't need to really focus on that. Little less important, right? So a historic structures report is a full condition of building assessment. It's a complete history narrative, decorative finishes study, furnishing study, treatment and use recommendation, as-built drawings, interpretive use analysis, a timeline of ownership, of the ownership history and changes to the building over time, and a whole lot more. Like most of our condition assessments printed out for historic structure reports, those reports are usually at least an inch thick. Some of them double that. It's a lot of work, but it is incredibly important information, has a lot of Jen's research in it, and it's really, really informative. And there are a lot of funding sources that will fund your historic structure report and will not fund the brick and mortar unless you have a historic structures report. So it's just important to understand who's funding your project, what they require, and then we'll work with you to understand what it is that your project really needs, that you're not getting services you don't need, you're just kind of getting the full scope of what you actually need. So this is also really important. Jen was talking about some modern augmentations that happen to these historic buildings as they're being used in various other ways over time. So we always recommend an exploratory demolition phase. Now, don't let the term demolition scare you. Some of the theaters that we go to are completely historically intact, but you will find that there are buildings. This image is funny, right? You're like, why is she showing us these crazy images? But anyway, so sometimes we find that the buildings were morphed and used for something else, and so the things that were not convenient for these modern uses to have in this historic theater are either ripped out or covered over, and we need to figure out which of those two things happened, because guess what? budget, right? What historically is still there and how damaged is it? So this lovely project here, which Allison I'm sure recognizes this one, what we're looking for here is the grand stair lobby. It's a 2-story volume of space, and on your image on the left is a Chinese restaurant's food storage room, walk-in cooler, and refrigeration. And the image on the right is a retail clothing storeroom. What we're looking for is this. Oh, hello, I went too far. Ruined the surprise. This is what we're looking for. One of your other research sources is also the Theater Society of America. They have great historic images of a ton of historic theaters all over the country. And there's other sources like that strictly deal in theater research. Really, really great resource. So this is what we're looking for. And so the owner, God love him, had his own crew that works on his buildings because he owns a lot of real estate. And so he actually used his crew to carefully, obviously he had to let his tenants go, but it's for a good cause. So he asked his tenants to leave, terminated their leases with due notice, and used his crew to take out the retail storeroom and the Chinese restaurant, and this is what we found. So we have a gorgeous terracotta balustrade, and we are missing some of that balustrade, and we're missing the first 12 stair risers. And so there's actually a lot here. Now, the reason you see all this black is, again, there was a fire in the building, but a lot of the historic plasterwork is actually still there. You just can't see it because it's black. So the image at the top, with the flies just landing on it, you can see where there's a line where fire was and fire wasn't because there was a more modern wall placed there. Interestingly enough, some I don't know, well-to-do, like someone well-minded, I don't know, he had, I guess his heart was in the right place. The city, Milwaukee County bought these buildings. It's a group of buildings that they bought, and our client bought all 3 buildings. They actually tore out the decorative terracotta that's missing to make this space and divide it so that the county could use it for offices and other things. They flattened out the floor in the theater, which actually works really great for the proposed use of the building because now we don't have a sloped floor anymore. So it works great for the new use. If you have it intact, if you want tax credits, you can't flatten out the floor slope, you have to keep it. So just FYI. But so they did all these things, but someone, I forget his name, but Matt Jaros actually knows him too, took all of the terracotta and all of the other historic elements that were ripped out of the building. This is the only space in the building that does not have almost all of its historic detail intact. And so somewhere in a semi-truck in Florida is all of that terracotta. And I'll be darned if we can't get out. This guy will not return my phone call, so Matt and I are going to go down there,
Find him.
fly to Florida, and we're going to get this terracotta back.
I think they might be in St. Charles, Missouri.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right, that is, I probably went way over my time. That is all that Jen and I have for you this morning, and we are happy now. Jen, come back up. Questions? Do we have any? Are we good? Hey, Steve, how are you?
I've got a question about, I'm wondering if you've done any work with conservation management plans.
Yes, we have.
I've kind of moved away from HSRs and do conservation management plans. And I like them because you bring stakeholders together and you talk to them about that you're using, you're kind of managing the conservation resource in a way that you don't do in HSR. HSR usually you pick periods so you can make something kind of back. So I just wanted to mention that the getting has an entire database of conservation management.
They do. And I was just there not that long ago. That was pretty cool. Yeah, we actually do work in conservation management plans as well because in HSR, while they're really informative, you don't necessarily need it. It's just a lot of times, a lot of the big funding sources for some of the historic theaters or some, they require it.
What's the HSR? Sorry.
Historic Structures Report. Sorry, you're going to hear a lot of acronyms. And like SHPO, HSR, NPS, you're like, what do those mean? Yeah, Historic Structures Report. And, and those are really unfortunately the thing that they don't do is you don't really need an HSR if you can do a conservation management plan instead, because that cuts to the chase more of what you need and how team members are going to work together. And it's just a lot more holistic way of looking at a project. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the bigger funding sources for theaters actually require the HSR versus that. And it's sort of their standard to go, which is why I didn't talk about that. But thank you for the question, because now we've talked about that. Anything else? Hello? Yes?
Hi, so this might be a little self-interested because I'm a fundraiser, but a lot of theaters that I see don't have a line item for fundraising, and it takes a lot of time and frankly a lot of expertise to write good grants to get money.
Yep.
And it has an impact on how you scale the project, whether you phase it, what things come and what things follow. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, and that is something I believe I had in my slides of something that you should include in the prioritized list of repairs is the fundraising costs, because it does actually, to your point, it does cost money to hire a fundraising manager and to run the whole fundraising process and to get the word out about your project and to bring people together and have meetings and all of those things. They aren't free. So fundraising, you think, oh, we'll just go out and ask the people for money. It is way more complicated than that. So thank you for asking that question. Yes?
Donna, could you talk a little bit to the importance to have a contingency, and that despite all your best efforts to do research, do exploratory, careful demolition, that 3 feet over from an opening, everything could be different.
Well, you kind of just did it for us, didn't you? And to your point, like that's absolutely true, is that the reason that we include a contingency and we recommend that it be larger than the construction contingency on new construction, and we'll make a recommendation for what we feel like that, and your architect will as well, what we feel like that contingency should be based on the condition of your building, is there are always undiscovered conditions. And you'll open something up, or they'll be installing MEP, there'll always be something where we'll remove something and be like, didn't know that was there. And we literally, I kid you not, some of the colleagues I have in this room will make fun of me because we literally crawl everywhere. We wear hard hats, we get incredibly dirty, we crawl in all the crawl spaces, we crawl, up over the domes, we try really to get everywhere we can in a building, so that we don't have surprises. And you can't help that you are going to have a surprise in a historic building until they really start working on it. The other reason for contingencies is that, unfortunately, damage happens during construction. And sometimes that's unavoidable, or sometimes the pathway for how you get something new installed means that something that's historically intact has to be sacrificed or damaged in some way to get you there. And so you don't really understand that, and it will, until you actually get your hands on the building and they're constructing. And there are some, just had this conversation in a meeting last week with a client who didn't understand why I couldn't do cost estimates for skylights that are 30 feet off the floor. Well, can you get me to those skylights before you've staged the project? No, you can't. So how can I cost estimate something I can't get my hand on? I can guess, but I can't actually take thorough measurements and put my hand on that steel until you can get me there. And so those contingency numbers are really, really important for things like that. Any other questions? Yes?
Could you speak to how important it is for historic material analysis, especially planning that in your budget?
How many of you in here, by show of hands, are married? This is related, I swear to God. Okay, any good marriage, you need compatibility, right? So if you have a material that you put in that is completely incompatible with the historic material, what do you have? You have a material divorce. And I know that sounds really funny, but it's a really great way to remember that replacing like with like gets like results. So to your point, testing is how you determine what that material match needs to be. And I will have someone who will argue with me all day long about it doesn't matter if you replace lime putty mortar with typo. Typo didn't exist historically, so we're putting this mortar in buildings on top of lime putty mortar that was never used historically, and you don't really know what it's going to do. But guess what? That's the go-to mortar type for all building rehabilitation and restoration, completely acceptable by the National Park Service. Don't do that. You're going to spend more money on mortar, but guess what? It will last longer than we all are going to live in this room. And so by doing mortar analysis, plaster analysis, paint analysis, all of those things, you will have a really accurate read on how you're going to best spend your dollars. And then if they're like, man, we really don't have enough money in the budget, we need to cut it down, then we can have a really educated conversation about what we need to cut out and what can come out. And frankly, in my opinion, with the building pathology background, the things that should come out are the new things you're adding. I don't, like take out the coffee bar and spend the money on the right mortar. Like that, repair the terracotta appropriately and rebuild your parapets and leave out something, make the bathrooms less fancy, I don't know. Spend the money on the core building elements that are really going to last the next 100 years, because they will if you do it right, and you don't want to have to do it again. Does that answer your question? Thanks. Forgive the marriage metaphor. Hey.
Donna, one quick question
Yeah.
related to your slide showing the Theater Historical Society of America.
Yeah.
So they are a great resource. I have a lot of photographs, have a marquee magazine. So this is a question for you and maybe for the room. They seem to be, when you access their website now, it's like they're not active. Do you know anything about that? Do they have staff that
Call
is...
them.
What? Okay, and I've tried that too.
Keep calling them.
Okay, all right.
Because right now they're like, it's just, look, people are short-staffed, and it just takes a while, and they, low-hanging fruit metaphor.
Yeah.
If you be honestly, like, I'm not opposed to being annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just keep calling them.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you experienced
like
that.
I'm having like some of these really finer resources, like they're not answering their emails, and it seems like a lot of our millennial friends are really opposed to making phone calls. Just keep calling them, because a lot of other people aren't calling them.
Donna, we have somebody here who can speak to that.
Oh, great.
I'm a member.
Yeah,
They lost all of their staff about 2-3 years ago.
Okay.
Nice.
And so the only way that I've been able to get a hold of them is on Facebook.
Okay.
They do answer their Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
And they do still have their archive in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
I don't know how accessible the archive aspect is. And they just sent out the first marquee in like 2 years earlier this year.
Okay.
So they still exist, but Facebook is the only way to get it right now.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and being able to answer our question. That's awesome. Anybody else? Are we good? All right, we are. Thank you so much, folks.